Did you know that the signs of dementia can appear long before an official diagnosis is made? This often surprises many people. Not the obvious memory loss that we think of, but the subtle changes that creep into everyday life. These signs are subtle, easy to miss, and sometimes mistaken for normal aging. But if you look closely, they can tell an important story about your mental health. Recognizing them early not only helps you understand yourself or a loved one better, but also gives you the opportunity to prepare, take action, and protect your quality of life longer. Dementia doesn't come on suddenly. It often starts with small signals, like a whisper from your body, that something is changing. These signals aren't dramatic. They don't immediately cause you to worry, but they are deeply meaningful. If you ignore them, they can quietly grow, leading to greater difficulties later. But if you pay attention, you can take the opportunity to slow the process, seek support, and help yourself or a loved one stay independent for as long as possible. Today, we're going to explore 5 early signs, changes that can appear up to a year before dementia is detected. They're not meant to scare you, but to help you prepare, so you can look after your health and support those around you with confidence and understanding. Our goal is not to make alarming predictions. It is to equip you with the knowledge to recognize these signs and know how to respond. As you gain a better understanding, you will find yourself more empowered to face the changes that come with aging. You will have practical ideas to apply, not only for yourself but also for those you love. If you stick with this journey to the end, you will not only recognize the signs more clearly, but you will also come away with concrete ways to protect your independent, fulfilling life. Let's start with the first sign, a small change that can say a lot. Sign number 1, mild decline in everyday memory. One of the earliest signs of dementia is often subtle, easily overlooked, because it's not so obvious. It's a slight lapse in memory, especially when it involves things that were once familiar and automatic, a part of everyday life. It's not forgetting things or not recognizing loved ones. Those usually come much later. Instead, it's a fleeting moment when you realize you can't remember what you were doing or why you were doing it. Imagine walking into the kitchen, standing there for a moment, and then realizing you don't know what you were going to get, or misplacing your glasses, even though they're always in the same spot on the counter. Maybe you miss a dentist appointment, even though you're sure you wrote it down on your calendar. These moments may seem innocuous, and sometimes they really are. Everyone forgets things from time to time, especially when they're busy or tired. But when these slip-ups become more frequent, when they start to creep into your daily routine, they can be a sign that something deeper is going on. What makes these errors different is that they are not just forgetfulness. They are often accompanied by a lack of awareness of the forgetfulness itself. For example, you might retell a story 3 times in one afternoon without realizing you were repeating it. It is only when someone gently reminds you that you do it that you are startled. Or you might forget to turn off the stove, not because you were in a hurry, but because the task suddenly slipped your mind mid-sentence. These moments can cause a quiet frustration. Deep down, you know something is wrong, but you may tell yourself that you are just tired, or distracted, or old. Consider Harold, a 74-year-old who lives at home with his family. His daughter noticed that every time he called, he asked her the same question about her job. At first, she thought it was just his way of showing concern, but gradually, she realized that he couldn't remember the answer she'd given him, even just minutes before. Then one day he forgot to renew his driver's license, something he'd done on time for decades. These incidents weren't so serious individually, but when they accumulated, they formed a pattern, a signal that his memory was changing. These memory lapses aren't like forgetting the name of an old friend or a song from your youth. They involve familiar, everyday things you used to do without thinking. When they start to interfere with your life, like forgetting to pay a bill, missing a medication, or having trouble keeping track of your daily tasks, that's when you need to pay attention. Not to panic, but to start observing, taking notes, and figuring out whether they're a sign of a bigger problem. Importantly, these changes can appear long before dementia becomes apparent, even years later. They're not easy to spot, especially if the person is functioning well in other areas, like small talk or self-care. But their subtlety makes them silent red flags. If caught early, there are things you can do. Talk to your doctor, monitor changes over time, or adjust your routine to protect your safety and independence. A small notebook to keep track of your schedule, a habit like Tomlinson's, of checking the kitchen before leaving the house, or an open conversation with your family can make a big difference. Sign number 2, changes in mood or personality. When we think of dementia, most of us immediately think of memory loss. But in fact, long before memory becomes a problem, a person may begin to change the way they feel, behave, or interact with the world around them. These changes are more than just a bad day or a general irritability. They are shifts that are inconsistent with who they used to be, and they often come about for no apparent reason, leaving family and friends baffled. One common symptom is an increase in irritability or frustration. A person who was once patient and easygoing may suddenly become short-tempered, easily angered by small things that they would have previously overlooked. For example, they may become upset when an item is out of place or become upset when their daily routine is disrupted. It's not that their life has become more difficult, it's that their tolerance for things has shrunk, quietly and inexplicably. Some people go in the opposite direction, becoming more anxious or withdrawn. A grandmother who once eagerly attended church or book club meetings may now find excuses to stay home. She may say she's tired and doesn't want to go out, but deeper down, once familiar environments feel overwhelming. Keeping up with a group chat, processing multiple messages, or even getting ready to go somewhere suddenly becomes a burden. This stress may cause them to avoid it, not because they don't care, but because they don't feel comfortable with it. Some people also begin to show a lack of emotion or apathy. They may lose interest in hobbies they once enjoyed, such as sewing, playing cards, or taking care of plants. They may stop taking the initiative to talk to friends, or show less enthusiasm for things that used to make them laugh. This is not always clear-cut depression. It may just be a subtle distance, as if the light inside them is dimming. What is worrying is when these changes have no obvious cause, such as a death, illness, or major life event. Consider Mr. Walter, a 76-year-old man who was once known for his openness and curiosity. His daughter noticed that he was starting to change. He became more rigid, skeptical even of simple things, like when she explained a change in his insurance. He rejected new ideas with a strange, uncharacteristic stubbornness. She sensed that he was more than just being cranky. His view of the world was changing, and that gave her pause. These mood or personality changes are important because they often reflect stress in the brain's emotional regulation systems. They can precede memory problems by months, providing an early clue that something is wrong. If a person begins to withdraw socially, become more withdrawn, or react more aggressively than usual, it's time to take notice. Not to jump to conclusions, but to start looking more closely to see if this is a sign of a deeper problem. These changes aren't always easy to spot. They can be mistaken for stress, fatigue, or even aging, but it's their newness and persistence that make them noticeable. If you notice that your loved one isn't laughing at the same jokes, isn't as eager to talk, or seems different for no apparent reason, take the time to investigate. A medical checkup, a gentle conversation, or just a show of concern can open the door to understanding and support. One of the early, but often overlooked, signs of dementia is difficulty following the flow of a conversation. This isn't the small fleeting moment when you forget a detail or lose track of an idea, something everyone experiences from time to time. Rather, it's a deeper struggle where you feel like words, ideas, or stories are coming at you too fast, too complex for you to keep up. For older adults, this can cause a sense of confusion, even frustration, as if their minds are trying to catch up with a train they can't keep up with. Imagine you're sitting in a family conversation where everyone is taking turns telling stories and laughing. Normally, you'd chime in, adding a joke or a relevant memory, but now you find yourself just sitting there, nodding, not really understanding what's being said. You might ask the other person to repeat, not because you didn't hear it, but because your brain couldn't process the information in time. You might respond, but your response is off topic, not necessarily because you weren't paying attention, but because you didn't grasp the full meaning of the story. This sign is often more pronounced in complex situations, such as when many people are talking at once, or when there is background noise. An older person may start avoiding large gatherings, not because they don't want to see anyone, but because they feel overwhelmed. They may feel like everything is happening too fast, too confusing, and they can't keep up. This isn't the same as ordinary distraction. It's a change in the way the brain processes language, attention, and information, a sign that something is changing inside. Consider Harold, an 82-year-old who used to love family dinners. He was usually the center of conversation, always with a joke or a memory to share. But his daughter noticed that lately, he had become quieter. He sat there, nodding, but rarely participating. When asked after the meal, he would shrug, saying he couldn't keep up. She realized that he wasn't losing interest, but rather that he was having trouble keeping up with the flow of the conversation. The overlapping words, laughter, and stories made him feel out of place, even though he was still right in the middle of the family. Another aspect of this symptom is difficulty finding words. You might be speaking, then suddenly stop, because a familiar word, a word you've used 1,000 times, just doesn't come to mind. You know it's there, somewhere in your mind, but it doesn't come when you need it. This is different from forgetting the name of an old friend or a song. It's a disruption in everyday moments. When you want to express a simple idea but have to substitute a generic word like that or thing. Sometimes you might stop mid-sentence, leaving an awkward silence, because you can't figure out how to continue. These moments aren't just embarrassing. They can also make you feel self-conscious, especially in public or with people you don't know very well. You may worry that you'll say the wrong thing, that others won't understand, and over time, you start talking less. You avoid long conversations. You avoid telling stories because you're afraid you'll make a mistake. But what's most striking is the regularity of these struggles. Everyone forgets a word or gets lost in thought, but if it happens frequently, if you start noticing it and worrying about it, it's time to pay attention. The ability to follow and participate in a conversation is closely linked to how the brain processes language, attention, and memory. When this ability declines, even slightly, it can be one of the first signs that something deeper is changing. This affects not only individuals, but also relationships. If you feel like you can't join in on conversations, you may stop initiating them. You may feel isolated, even when you're surrounded by loved ones, and that isolation, if prolonged, can deprive your mind of an important source of stimulation, meaningful communication. Sign number 4, loss of interest in favorite hobbies. One of the most obvious and worrying signs is when a person begins to quietly withdraw from activities that once brought them joy. It could be a hobby, a routine, or a passion that they used to enjoy for hours. The change doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in gradually, sometimes so subtly, that even those closest to them don't notice it until they look back. But when you see someone who was once so alive in the things they loved seem to no longer care, it can be a sign that their mind is changing. Imagine someone who used to love tending a vegetable garden. Every spring, they meticulously planned, selected seeds, and spent time making sure the soil was fertile and the plants were healthy. But then one year, the garden was abandoned. There were no tomatoes, no lettuce, and only weeds growing where the care had been. When asked, they would say they didn't have the time or didn't think to. The next year, nothing had changed. The gardening tools sat in the shed, gathering dust, a reminder of the person they once were. The story of Walter, 78, is a typical example. He used to spend the spring tending his garden. He knew exactly where to place each plant, how to water it, and even proudly showed off his ripe tomatoes to the neighbors. But his daughter noticed that the garden was starting to get neglected. He stopped going out to till the soil, stopped asking for new seeds. When she asked, he just said he hadn't gotten around to it, but there was no regret in his voice. The next season, the garden was still empty, not because he was tired or busy. It was because a part of him had lost the motivation to start, to care, to find joy in what had once been meaningful. This loss of interest is not limited to big hobbies. It can show up in the little details of life. A person who used to enjoy reading the newspaper every morning may let it pile up without opening it. A person who used to be meticulous about choosing clothes may now wear anything, without caring about how they look. They may turn down invitations to hang out, not answer the phone, or let the mail pile up without opening it. It's not that they can't do these things, it's just that they no longer feel the importance of them. What makes this sign special is that it is not always accompanied by obvious sadness. A person may still be polite, still smile, still talk normally, but deep inside, the drive to act, to participate, to create, is gradually fading. They no longer make plans, no longer start new projects, no longer seek joy as before. This is different from slowing down, due to age. Slowing down is natural, physical, but loss of interest is an emotional distance, a disconnection from what once made them feel alive. In some cases, this withdrawal is a form of self-protection. If a person begins to notice that he or she is forgetting details, losing track of conversations, or having difficulty with familiar tasks, he or she may avoid situations that expose these weaknesses. He or she does not want others to notice, to feel embarrassed or judged. So he or she quietly withdraws from activities that he or she once enjoyed, and places that he or she was familiar with. But this withdrawal deprives him or her of mental stimulation, making him or her more vulnerable to mental decline. Sign number 5, difficulty with orientation and familiar places. One of the most worrying signs, though it often starts out subtle, is when a person has trouble finding their way around places that were once as familiar as the back of their hand. This isn't just a one-time forgetfulness or a misstep in a hurry. It's a deeper shift, as the mental maps they rely on every day, familiar streets, rooms, places, suddenly become unfamiliar, as if they're fading from their minds. Imagine you're driving to a local church that you've been going to weekly for years. The route is so familiar that you can walk it without thinking. But one day you miss a turn, and then you wind around and around, somehow not quite as you remember. You arrive, but you're left feeling confused, as if your mind has played a nasty joke. Or you stand in your own home, looking down the hallway, and suddenly aren't sure which door leads to your bedroom. These moments aren't just forgetfulness. They're signs that the way your brain processes space and orientation is changing. The story of 82-year-old Frank illustrates this well. He used to drive to church every Sunday, just 10 minutes away. But one morning, he missed a turn, then circled around a few times, somehow taking the wrong route. He made it to church, but the confusion left him stumped. A month later, he called his daughter in the middle of the afternoon and said he was standing on a street just a mile from home, but he didn't know how to get home. These situations don't always involve long distances. Sometimes they happen right in the home, forgetting which drawer holds cutlery or hesitating at the bathroom door, unsure if it's the right way. This sign is particularly notable because it is inconsistent. Some days everything is fine, and you can get around easily. But then there are days when you stand in front of a familiar store and can't remember how to get in. You may start relying more on others to guide you, or avoid going out because you're afraid of getting lost. Some people even stop driving, not because they can't drive, but because they lose confidence in their ability to find their way. This hesitation isn't carelessness. It reflects a decline in the way the brain processes spatial information, one of the first functions to be affected when dementia begins. New environments can make this symptom more pronounced. A visit to a friend's house or a walk through a large store can be overwhelming. You may cling to loved ones, hesitate in your steps, or look around in confusion, as if searching for a landmark in the fog. Even in familiar settings, like a restaurant you've been to before, you may forget the exit or get lost trying to find the bathroom. These moments can sap your confidence, making you worry that you're lost or judged, and over time you may choose to stay home instead. What makes this sign so concerning is that it's often hidden. A person might use their phone to navigate, or come up with vague excuses like traffic jams to cover up their lost drive, because they're still functioning well in other areas, like conversation or self-care. Loved ones may not notice until the pattern becomes more pronounced. But when you see someone start to hesitate in familiar places, take longer to follow familiar routes, or avoid going out because they're afraid of getting lost, it's time to pay attention. It's not just a memory issue. It's a problem with how the brain maps space, movement, and perception. When we look back at the 5 early signs of dementia, small lapses in memory, changes in mood, difficulty with conversation, loss of interest in hobbies, and confusion in familiar places, we realize that awareness is the first step to preparation. These changes are not an inevitable part of aging. They are gentle signals from the mind, calling for attention, care, and sometimes immediate action. They remind us that life is precious but also fragile, and how we respond to these signs says a lot about our compassion. Perhaps you notice a pattern in a loved one, or feel a moment that makes you stop and think about yourself. That's a good thing, because noticing small things can make a big difference. By catching them early, you open up space for understanding, support, and small changes that can prevent confusion or frustration later. A conversation with your doctor, a habit of keeping a journal, or simply taking the time to listen can be the beginning of a more meaningful journey. More importantly, these signs are not just medical clues. They are invitations to be present, to walk alongside those who are struggling, rather than letting them walk alone. If you see these signs in yourself, remember that you are not defined by your forgetfulness or hesitation. You are defined by the strength, the value, and the wisdom you have accumulated over the years. Seeking help or sharing your concerns does not weaken you. It strengthens you because it takes courage to look at difficult questions and move forward with confidence. There are ways to walk this journey with dignity. The early signs of dementia don't have to lead to fear. They can lead to understanding, to new habits, to a deeper appreciation for the simple joys of everyday life, and to connections that still make sense, even when words sometimes falter. Let's continue to observe, listen, and act with kindness. That's how we build not just longer, but fuller lives, for ourselves and those around us.